So you have to look at your attributes in the sense of you don't have to maximize all of them. You don't have to have all of them. What does your specific niche in life require? Because again, having too much of an attribute might in fact be detrimental. I always joke that the stand-up comic doesn't need a lot of empathy, because if you have too much empathy, how are you going to find funny at a funeral?
This is the Limitless Athlete Podcast. I'm Tom Foxley, founder of Mindset Rx'd and your host. And I believe self-knowledge is the foundation on which growth is built.
I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm willing to work as hard as I can.
There is no past, there's no future, there's just this moment right here.
If I did that, if I can get through that, like, come at me.
Changing how I saw myself, like as a man, not just as an athlete.
It's okay that I struggle. It's okay. That's part of the deal. It's how I respond to it.
Today on the Limitless Athlete Podcast, you will be listening to a conversation between author and former Navy SEAL Commander Rich Diviney and myself. After spending 20 plus years in the Navy SEALs, Rich wrote The Attributes, which is a book detailing what he believes are the attributes we all possess that lead to our success or lack thereof. In Rich's opinion, we all possess these attributes, but in different quantities. They develop different amounts for different people through both nature and nurture. For me, one of the things this podcast shows is the necessity for an athlete of any caliber, so no matter what you're aiming at, to get a deeper knowledge of themselves. Self-knowledge is the foundation on which mindset growth can be built. Just the same way that knowing about your muscular imbalances, you can generate better programming, and if you get blood tests, you can improve your health choices. Knowledge of who you are, like your temperament, your attributes, your personality, leads to creating an environment you can thrive in, understanding what drives you, how to motivate yourself, what's going to stop motivation, what's going to make you feel good, what makes you feel successful, and all this kind of stuff. To do this, you can use Big 5 personality tests, or the test that like Rich has put together with his team on his website, theattributes.com. You can use Myers-Briggs, all this kind of stuff. You can also just grab a journal, and free journal. We call it Observe Your Inner Athlete. Just write freely and see what's on the paper. Become the observer, generate perspective, and kind of see your mind as if you're studying yourself. So that is what's going to be in the podcast with Rich that I'll bring you in just a few moments. But don't forget, alongside this episode, we'll also be releasing the debrief where Rachel and I teach you how to apply these lessons of this interview into your training and wider life. And this is going to be released later in the week. So make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out. And now here is the wonderful Rich Diviney. Thank you for joining me and welcome to the show.
Well, thanks, Tom. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Where I'd like to start is really with how you develop some of your attributes and more the nurture side of things. Get to know like who is Rich Diviney behind this, and then see how you grew as you developed. So you mentioned in your podcast, in another podcast, that your dad was a pilot. What kind of things or attributes did he display, and what did you take from that?
So my dad was a pilot, but he was a private pilot. He was a lawyer, actually. His profession was law, but his hobby was flying, and so he had a plane. He co-owned a plane with a partner of his. It was a single-engine Mooney, which is a pretty neat little 4-seater plane. And it's funny. I don't know. I'd have to. Looking back, I think my dad's primary attributes were that certainly it's the ones that I think I got, and certainly that helped all of us and in being raised by him, were his patience. He had a lot of patience. He always had an open mind. He still has an open mind. And I think those were probably the two most predominant ones that I could remember. Obviously he had a lot, but both my parents, my mom was also patient. My mom also had a very open mind. And so that type of optic allowed for us to experience a lot of different things, and do it openly. There was never judgment. There was never, this has to be a way, this has to be do this. My dad and both my parents never forced us down any roads or lanes in terms of what we should be or shouldn't be. And so I think those were two primary ones that had a lot of influence on me and my siblings.
Do you remember any examples of that kind of freedom of opportunity?
Well, I would say that just, it's funny. I was just talking to someone yesterday and he asked if there were any books or what were some of what might have been some moments in your past that changed your trajectory. And I think, and the way I answered that is kind of the same way I'll answer this one, is that my mom and my dad, when we were younger, and I had to have been in the, early preteen, stages, right? But my mom and dad were both they were avid readers, and they both introduced us, certainly my brother and I, to some books that talked about the power of the subconscious mind. And so my brother and I dove into that stuff, and we started learning about it. And then of course, subliminal, influence and subliminal messages and things like that. And again, like I said before, I don't sit here to purport the efficacy of any of that. I don't know scientifically. I don't know how that all works, or even if it does. But what I do know is that type of endeavor, the research that my brother and I embarked upon, certainly set us upon a course of being really clear about what we wanted and understanding that and focusing on it and heading towards that. We became very focused on some of these more and comfortable with setting these audacious goals, which was back then was be Navy pilots, and then of course it morphed into becoming a Navy SEAL and things like that. But I think that type of openness that my parents displayed with us and giving us books to read and promoting that type of behavior was certainly instrumental.
It's almost like I can't think of a better example than like wine tasting. When you first taste wine, it's like, okay, it will taste the same. And
right.
Then it happens with coffee, it happens with anything. Like the more you taste it, the more you see the variety and the nuance and the subtleties in it. And when you're primed with something like the power of the subconscious mind in your youth, then you have that kind of that radio frequency dialed in. And it's like, okay, now I can receive those bits of information that I wouldn't received otherwise.
Which is interesting, by the way, because I think any parents who are listening, I think that's our responsibility. That's our primary responsibility as parents. Our primary responsibility as parents is to throw as many things in front of our kids' windshield as possible so they can just experience it and not do it with judgment, not do it with any expectation, just do it so that they get, we're in such developmental, our brains are so plastic from ages of birth till 22. So the more things we can throw in front of our kids in terms of experiences and ideas and concepts and allow them and teach them to ask questions about it and be skeptical in a good way. That's, I think, a key to development, something I try to do. I think my parents did with me and I try to do with my kids. So.
Yeah. And especially challenging scenarios as well. Like variety is fine, but if it doesn't challenge you, then you're missing out on a plethora of experience.
That's true. Yeah.
What were you like prior to the military?
I'm not sure the military changed me much. I would hypothesize that the military probably doesn't change too many people as much as it teaches people more about themselves. I will concede that if some people say no, it changed me, and that's fine. But certainly for me, and I think a lot of people I know, that type of experience helps teach me about myself. Again, in the book, I talk about hidden, dormant attributes. These attributes that we don't know we have because we've never been placed into experiences that test and tease those things out. And I think the military, and certainly the SEALs, was an absolute perfect laboratory inside of which I teased out, or these dormant attributes were teased out because I was placed in these extreme environments. So I learned about myself. When I started SEAL training, I had no plans to quit, but I also didn't know how everything was going to turn out, right? So you go in, so to be able to go through something like that and see 90% of the people drop out and then be standing tall at the end with that 10% and be like, okay, wait a second. I just learned a lot about myself. Now, the question is, when do you actually process that learning? And I think it took me several years, if not a decade or two, to begin to look back and say, okay, now what in fact have I learned about myself, versus just saying, okay, cool, what's the next thing? Because sometimes when we're young, we don't stop and say, okay, what did I actually learn about myself? But so the military taught me things about myself that I didn't know, and therefore caused me. And I think, and if I'm not gonna dodge your question, if I were to say changed me, it allowed me to experience what I would define as true confidence. And the way I would define true confidence is the ability to understand and know that regardless of how the environment and situation goes around you, whether it be upgrading or degrading, I know I'll perform through it. I understand what it takes to perform through that. Now, it may not be pretty. Okay, it might be ugly and painful and gritty, but I will find a way. And that's, I think, what I've learned about myself. And now that I've stepped into, well, certainly combat when I was in the SEALs, and of course leaving the SEAL teams and stepping into writing a book, being an author, building a business, that's how I approach life, which I account to my experience in the military for having illuminated that in myself.
I really like the idea of dormant attributes, and it's kind of, they're lying there awaiting the right stimulus.
Yeah.
And should those stimuli appear, you have the capacity to realize that potential that's there already. And that's the kind of, it's not a nature or nurture, it's a nature and nurture. And it's almost like the Big Five personality test. You sit within this band or this bracket of expression that you can possibly access.
Yeah.
And this can push you either way. Do you remember any times where you notice these dormant attributes revealing themselves?
Well, again, a lot of this is done by past introspection and interrogation, right? I look back at what I did versus in the moment. And I think, again, I just, SEAL training allowed me to understand about myself that I knew how to make it through very, very complex and tough challenges, physically and mentally. I had what it took. And I think to be able to do that, and then of course do it on hyperdrive as you go through your career, because SEAL training is easy compared to some of the stuff you'll experience in the actual SEAL teams, especially when you go into combat. But to be able to continue to do that throughout my career taught me a lot about my abilities. So I think that's the best. I hate to, it seems like I'm a little waffly on this, but I'm not sure if there was a definitive moment where I said, oh, okay, I got it. I think it took even me writing this book to explore attributes. I mean, I was writing the book and really thinking about my own performance as I wrote about these attributes to better understand and better articulate how these things show up. So that was even writing the book was a introspective process to some extent.
Yeah, you write so you can think clearly. Yeah, it's not only that, but that's one of the benefits of writing a book. It's like, okay, I can condense or solidify the arguments behind this. Yeah.
And I want to just hop back to something you said about dormant attributes, because I think it's important for people to understand dormant attributes. We all have dormant attributes, but the key to unlocking those dormant attributes is to insert yourself into challenge, stress, and uncertainty, because that's where they're going to show up. They're dormant for a reason. They're dormant because regular everyday life is not necessarily bringing them to the fore. So we need to look at challenge and stress differently. We need to, and this is exactly what you do if you are someone who is innovative or tries new things. You deliberately step outside your comfort zone. That's where the discovery of those attributes lies, is when you deliberately do that. And so that could be an exciting reason to do it.
Yeah. Well, it's the hero's journey as well. It's like you step outside into what King Arthur refers to as the darkest part of the forest. It's like that's where you start your journey in maximum uncertainty and maximum risk. And it's like that's the indication that you're doing something valuable with your energy.
Yeah, totally. And that's the juice and spice of life. I always joke that, people who, if there's anybody out there who loves roller coasters, I ask them, how many of you would like a roller coaster that only went up or only stayed flat? Okay, that's not what makes a roller coaster fun. What makes a roller coaster fun is the ups and downs, the turns and the loops. So it goes with life. I mean, what makes life fun and juicy and spicy are the ups and downs and the turns and the loops and the corners. So people, a lot of times, I think, really work hard to keep their coaster as flat as possible, or they try to keep it going up, and it's just not going to happen. I mean, it's just not going to happen, because even if you, as much as you try to stay away from the loops and the turns and the ups and the downs, life's going to throw it at you no matter what. I mean, look at COVID. I mean, COVID is a perfect example of that. COVID threw everybody into a down a hill, right, into a valley there that we all had to come up from, and we all have to loop around and do our own corners. But that's it. That's the spice of life, is the entirety of the roller coaster, not only on the uphill stuff.
Yeah, life would be so bland if it was just predictable, easy, simple. Like you'd, I think I can't remember, a Dostoevsky quote maybe about this, if all you ever had to do was fornicate and eat cake, you'd smash it to pieces within minutes. It would be so boring.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, we need that contrast. It's the contrast that gives us the real juice, right? Just like you said, if you eat too much candy's going to stop tasting good. You need to have, broccoli and Brussels sprouts, and then have another piece of candy, and then you really taste that sweetness.
So you're at some point in the teams, you're working in the military, and then how did you end up overseeing selection and training?
Yeah, I was about midway through my career. I applied and got through the selection and assessment training for a very specialized SEAL command, and was serving there for several years, and then was asked to take over the program, the assessment selection training program. And so that's really when, and we had problems up till that point with effectively articulating why guys weren't making it through. Now, again, this specific command and program, what we did was there were SEALs from around all the other SEAL teams that would apply to come to this specific program. And so they'd apply, they'd get accepted. You have to be kind of the top of the heap to get accepted to come. So these guys were coming, and they were really the top of their game. Highly recommended, great records, all that stuff. And yet they'd go through our program, we'd get about a 50% attrition rate, which again, every assessment and selection program is designed to attrite. So there's nothing wrong with that piece. What was wrong was what we couldn't effectively articulate why guys weren't making it through. So guys were coming thinking that, they were coming with very excellent records and really at the top of their game, and then not making it, and then basically being told, I'm sorry, you couldn't cut it. You didn't have this, that, you couldn't shoot very well. And it just didn't sit right with them. It didn't sit right with us. It was a lazy way to explain it. And the leadership was starting to get frustrated too, because we couldn't effectively articulate why. And so when I took over, I was charged with kind of figuring this out so that we could better explain it. And that's really when I had to look at performance and ask myself, okay, what in fact is performance? What are we looking at when we look at performance? And that's when I really had to say, okay, well, it's different. It's not just these visible skills that we see. And part of my calculus was looking back at my own basic SEAL training in BUDS, which is basic SEAL training, basic underwater demolition / SEAL training. That's the 9-month course that guys go through, or 6-month, I guess, course that guys go through, and has Hell Week and all that stuff. And there's a 90% attrition. But you spend hundreds of hours, as I did, hundreds of hours running around with heavy boats on your head, and hundreds of hours exercising with 300-pound telephone poles and running around with those things and freezing in the surf zone. And at the time I looked back and I said, okay, I've done hundreds of combat missions in Iraq and Afghanistan. I've done thousands of training evolutions. Never on one did I ever carry a boat on my head or a 300-pound telephone pole on my shoulder, right? So what that told me is what they were doing to us in SEAL training wasn't training us in the skills to be Navy SEALs. They were putting us into situations, into environments to tease out these other things, these hidden drivers, these attributes, to see if we had what it took. And so I So that at that point, I said, okay, we have to separate skills and attributes. These are different things. And that was the impetus of the work I did in the teams. And then, of course, the work I did out of the teams with the book.
Something I'm interested in is whether you had a sense of who would be successful in those processes beforehand, and whether it's just articulating that. And the reason I ask is because I remember on kind of the pre-selection phase of the Royal Marines, which I spent a few years in, I was looking around and there was 150 blokes there. And you could see, sure, physically, because you could tell he can do 8 pull-ups or whatever just by looking at people. But you could look around and say, oh, that's the type of person who I think is going to really nail this. And then it goes down to like 50 on day one. And then, 2 years later, there's 8 of us there, including backtroopers. And it's like, okay, 6 out of these 8, I would have put money on them still being here. Yeah. And then there's the 2, you're like, I would never have guessed that you would have been there. And it's a real surprise, but they obviously had the attributes, or at least the physical capacity. There's something within them. So articulating exactly what they are and defining what would lead to success there is like a difficult thing to do, but we have a sense of it.
Yeah, I think some people do. Although in anything Navy SEAL related, I would reverse those numbers. I would say in Navy SEAL training, you can probably predict 2 out of 8 accurately, and probably even less. But if we take those numbers, you can say, okay, I think out of these 8 people, maybe 2 will be standing at the end. It's that difficult because you're talking about things that have very little to do with physicality. They have to do with the way we think, the way we process the world, the way you operate in stress and challenge, the way you behave. And so we did a lot of work, and I know I was very adamant about not trying to pre-select the process. The process is the process, because the process is environmental. And there's been a lot of work, and still has been a lot of work, to try to better predict who will make it through the process, whether it be basic SEAL training or the stuff I was running. And I was always like, well, why are we doing that? There's no way to, if you do that, you're probably not going to get it right. And B, worst case, you're going to deselect someone for the wrong reasons that could have actually made it through. So just do your best to see if they can, if we think they should start the training, and then put them through the experience, because the experience is the process. The process is the selection. And so now, that said, like you kind of mentioned, there were a couple of dudes who I had in my cadre, just awesome SEALs, and they seemed to have a little bit of a sixth sense about this stuff, right? And it was uncanny sometimes to see them. We'd have part of the initial selection of, hey, can you come here, would be an interview, and we'd sit in an interview, and we'd go through this interview with a guy, and I'd be like, man, this guy's great, and I'd look over at my buddy, and he'd be like, that guy's never going to make it through, right? Like, how do you know that? I mean, so there is, I think, there is a little bit of a sixth sense the more you're in the community. A few guys I've worked with have had that, and well, they're all retired now, but they probably still have that. But that's a rarity, and you have to be careful about giving permission for someone to make that type of assessment. Someone has to be very trusted, and you have to say, okay, this guy, he knows what he's talking about. And even that guy would admit, those guys I'm talking about with that sixth sense would be like, okay, well, listen, I don't think he's good, but let's just see how he does. 9 times out of 10, they'd be right, but they would gauge themselves on the actual process. They wouldn't try to pre-predict it. So you just have to be careful. When it comes to attributes are very hard to see unless you've already put someone in stress and challenge. Okay, so standing around before something happens is often not the best place. You have to see them in challenge. That's when they're the most visible. And that's why interviews and this type of pre-prediction gets a little bit sketchy.
Well, there's that moment when you've been through something physically awful, and and I'm not talking about the truly awful things, but those moments of fizz where you're like, okay, that was absolutely disgusting, and you see true character revealed, or you're sleep deprived for however many hours, and you see that true character revealed. And I suppose that's a shortcut to revealing character.
And an indicator for these training programs, whether it be Royal Marines or SEAL training, would be, in fact, to look at someone's past, right? So one of the things that we found that, again, it's not 100% accurate, but it started to be a little bit more accurate, was that fighters, like wrestlers, for example, they tended to do pretty well in SEAL training. Why? Well, because wrestling is a sport that has, it's extremely tough, and the workouts are like just insanely gritty. B, the sport itself is highly unpredictable, right? When you are fighting another human being, you have no idea how that human beings or what that human beings going to do. You have some thoughts at what they might do, but other than that, you are basically in react, proact. I mean, you're constantly gauging yourself in a fighting situation. So now I went through in the mid 90s. So back then it was wrestling, maybe some boxing. Now I would have to look at the data, but I would imagine anybody who's in the MMA space or things like that would likely do their odds would be better, because in the fighting world, you're dealing it with a sport that's highly unpredictable, and in the MMA world with very few rules. And that's the type of mind that often gets through this type of training.
Yeah, you've got to maintain composure. That's when there's something else fighting against you. That's exactly what that's right. You're forced to do. Yeah. There's the guy who is currently the best CrossFit athlete in the world, Justin Medeiros. He has a background in wrestling, and everyone points to that. It's like, okay, you can see that tenacity. You can see not only the tenacity, but the composure in the moment, and that kind of when everyone else has their proper pain face on, you can see the kind of the focus and the intentionality in his actions.
It's the ability to operate in chaos.
Lovely. So I think it's probably useful to define, as we haven't done so, what is an attribute and how does it differ from a skill?
Oh yeah, we haven't done that yet. Okay, let's do it. All right, skills and attributes. Skills are not inherent to our nature. So in other words, none of us are born with the ability to ride a bike or throw a ball or shoot a gun. We can be trained to do those things. We can be taught to do those things. All right. Skills also direct our behavior in known and specific environments. So they tell us how and when to ride a bike, how and when to drive a car, how and when to shoot a gun. And then finally, because skills are visible and kind of didactic that way, they're very easy to measure and assess and test. You can see how well anybody does any one of those things. Now, what skills don't tell us is how we're going to show up in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, because in an unknown environment, it's very difficult, if not impossible, to apply a known skill. This is where we lean on our attributes. Attributes, on the other hand, are inherent to our nature. Okay, we're all born with levels of patience and situational awareness and adaptability. Now, we can certainly develop them over time and experience, but you can see levels of this stuff in small children. So there is a nature component to attributes. Attributes don't direct behavior; they inform behavior, right? So for example, my son's levels of resilience and perseverance informed the way he showed up when he was learning the skill of riding a bike, and he was falling off a dozen times doing so. Right, so they inform our behavior. And then because they're hidden in the background and difficult to see, they're very hard to assess and measure and test, right? You can't sit across the table in an interview process and assess someone's levels of patience or adaptability or resilience. So it's times of it's stress, challenge, and certainty that actually begin to bring these things to the fore. When you create environments where skills cannot be applied is when we start to see attributes really show up. And so attributes are an enormous part of how we perform and behave every single day, whether it's, in everyday life or in challenge, uncertainty, and stress. So they're running our operating system all the time. We just see them at their most raw when those skills can be applied when it's challenging and stressful. So that's the idea. And so if you want to understand your performance at a whole deeper level, you need to start to understand attributes and which ones you have more of and which ones you have less of. And so just for the audience, again, their sake, I write about 25 attributes. All of us have all of the attributes. The difference in each one of us are the levels to which we have each, right? So we'll take adaptability. If 10 is high and 1 is low, I would probably come in at around a level 8 on adaptability. That means when the environment changes around me outside of my control, it's fairly easy for me to go with the flow and roll with it. I'm fairly adaptable. I'm kind of in that range. Someone else might be a level 3, which means the same thing happens to them. It's difficult for them. They're still adaptable. It's just hard, right? So we all have different levels of each attribute, and that begins, once we understand those levels, it begins to inform us as to why we have friction points in certain aspects of life, right? If you are low on adaptability, you understand it's like, okay, now I know why when things change around me and I can't control it, why I get so tense and it's so hard for me, okay? That begins to inform our behavior. And then, of course, when you start to work with teams and other people, understanding how our attributes and skills, but attributes mesh together, starts to inform us on how our team actually performs in uncertainty, challenge, and stress, and actually works together and dynamically as a team.
Hey, if you're enjoying this episode, chances are you'll enjoy our free ebook, How to Stop Substandard Self-Critical Plateaus and Unleash Your Potential. It's a step-by-step guide to finding your mojo again and getting back to the athlete you know you can be. It's free. You just have to stick your email address in and download it. To find it, head to mindsetrxd.com/ebook. That's mindsetrxd.com/ebook. Now, let's get on with the show. Have you seen a correlation between the attributes and something, for example, like the Big 5 personality test? Because it strikes me as someone who's highly open to new experience would probably score pretty well on adaptability. Someone who's highly neurotic would probably score kind of lower on adaptability. Is there any kind of correlation? Is there any background data on that?
I found a correlation. I looked at the Big 5 when I was writing, and I found a correlation. The reason why I wanted to stay away from personality is because I wanted to really get down to elemental behavior. I think personality is a collection of a lot of different things. It's a collection of attributes, of course, a collection of values, beliefs, experiences, things like that, emotions. So personality, and you can, I mean, one of the ways we can kind of say this is personalities start to emerge as a human gets a little bit older, right? Personality and character start to emerge. You can see attributes in really small kids. I mean, you can really see there are kids who are patient and there are kids who are inherently impatient, right? There are kids who are adaptable and all that stuff. So I think the Big 5 and all these personality assessments are actually really cool. And I think they all speak very well to and are congruent with what I'm talking about, because I'm backing it up a little bit more, because I'm really interested in kind of the rawest form of us. How does that work? There are correlations. I looked at that, and I think understanding attributes can help you even further understand your Big 5 personality or any personality.
Yeah, it seems like this self-knowledge is the foundation of how to correctly deploy your actions or your intentions, something like that. How have you personally used this to modify either behaviors or intentions?
Well, I mean, if I understand where I'm a little bit lower, again, let's take empathy. I've always, for a long time, I've tried to work on being more empathetic, and I think it's because I just naturally I come to the game a little bit lower on empathy, and so understanding that allows me to say, okay, it allows me to take a pause, and in the moment where I want to be more empathetic or apply empathy, it allows me to say, okay, I am going to pause and I'm going to work on doing this. That's what I'm going to do right now, versus just rolling through it with the lower levels that I have. And so understanding where you're a little bit lower allows you to make a conscious choice to develop it further. Now, that said, none of us can have the optimal amounts of every attribute. Okay, that's unrealistic. And none of us, by the way, need to. Okay, the idea would be first of all, what does your engine look like? What does your attribute structure look like? And then what niche are you in? What are you up to in life? Because you might be in the perfect niche in life that exploits and exemplifies all the attributes that you have a lot of. That's probably why you feel happy and passionate about what you're doing. And so that in that case, you might say, okay, well, cool. I mean, I kind of relate us to automobiles, so kind of like the movie Cars. Some of us are Jeeps, some of us are Ferraris, some of us are SUVs. And there's no judgment, because the Jeep can do things the Ferrari can't do, and the Ferrari can do things the Jeep can't do. But it's good to look under the hood and see what you are, because you might be a Jeep that's trying to run on a Ferrari track, all right, or a Ferrari that's trying to run on a Jeep track. And if you are, then you start to say, oh, wait a second, okay, that's why I feel so much friction right now. That's why things aren't clicking. I am a Jeep, I need to get to a Jeep track, or a Ferrari, get to a Ferrari track. Or you say, actually, I'm a Jeep and I'm on a Ferrari track, but I want to be on a Ferrari track. So now I know exactly what are those things that I need to work on to do better as a Jeep on a Ferrari track. Okay, so you have to look at your attributes in the sense of you don't have to maximize all of them. You don't have to have all of them. What does your specific niche in life require? Because again, having too much of an attribute might in fact be detrimental. I always joke that the stand-up comic doesn't need a lot of empathy, because if you have too much empathy, how are you going to find funny at a funeral, right? I mean, stand-up comic actually needs to have a moderate sense of empathy, at least contextually, so that he or she can find funniness in experiences that maybe some other people would never be able to. And so you have to think about which attributes actually are the best for whatever pathway you want to explore.
Yeah, it's almost like you can act as if you have an attribute fully developed, but it might not be, or I say fully developed, optimally developed, something like that, or
right.
Maximally developed. And that could be a useful tool to deploy, but it's always going to be effortful. It's always going to be something.
It's always going to take effort. It's always going to be uncomfortable. And so the key to developing any attribute is to understand. So I always say you can't learn an attribute the same way you can learn a skill. All right. And so the quick back of the envelope test for someone to determine whether or not it's an attribute or a skill is to ask this question: can I teach it or can it be taught? If the answer is yes, it's probably a skill. All right. If the answer is no, it's probably an attribute. So the example would be, Tom, you say, and you did some time in the Marines, so you might not need this, but you'd say, hey, Rich, I want to learn how to shoot a pistol and hit a bullseye every time, right? Well, you know as well as I could take you out to the range and teach you how to do that within a couple hours. Okay, that is a skill. Or you could say, Rich, I want to learn more patience or more adaptability. Okay, I can't teach you that. That's something you have to do yourself. So developing an attribute takes self-motivation, self-direction, and it takes a willingness for that person to go seek out environments and conditions that test and tease that attribute. So if you want to develop your patience, for example, you have to go find environments that test your patience, whatever that looks like for you. I mean, it could be I'm going to go drive in traffic deliberately, or I'm going to stand in the longest line at the grocery store. I always say having kids, that'll always help develop your patience. But whatever that looks like for you, it takes the person to deliberately step into discomfort, because it is going to feel uncomfortable. I mean, hands down, but that's how you develop them.
It's interesting because the military is one environment, professional sports is another, where a huge amount of your time is spent training for something, and then a very small amount of time is spent actually doing that. Yeah. And very few other areas of life do we go out and train for something so much as a time percentage, like your work.
Yeah.
95% is probably doing, and you very, very rarely get a weekend away to go on some sort of development strategy. Right. But if you can get out and, okay, I'm going to train my patience today, I'm going to train my adaptability, something like that, or build this into a training session. There's options all around, I'm guessing.
I think we have to be careful with the word training. Again, I'm very into semantics. And so, and the military, I got this, it came from the Joint Staff College here in the US, but the Joint Forces College or whatever. But they said, we train for certainty and we educate for uncertainty. Training typically implies skills. It's a repetitive process that's conditional in nature. And that's predictable in nature. Okay, we train skills, whatever those are. Education, however, is different. Education is experiential a lot of times. We're throwing ourselves and putting ourselves into environments that show us new things and open our minds to new concepts. This is the training ground inside of which you do attribute development. Because Because again, attributes are most often and most effectively developed inside of challenge and uncertainty, and training implies certainty. So as soon as you start repeating something over and over, you've generated certainty about it. So you actually have to mix it up. Again, so here's an example. You could say, I'm going to train on being adaptable. All right, I'm going to find this environment where it's kind of constantly changing around me. Okay. And you just place yourself into that environment and do that day after day after day. Well, inevitably what's going to happen is you're going to get used to that environment, which means your adaptability development is going to degrade as you get used to that environment. So you have to actually pick different environments that are changing so you can more effectively develop that attribute, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. It reminds me of, there's a book called The Stoic Challenge by William B. Irvin. And he talks about going out and assuming or undertaking Stoic challenges, and the idea of putting yourself in unpredictable environments. So there's a nice correlation between those points.
Yeah.
How much do you reckon attributes can change? Have you seen some people change or develop huge amounts? Have you seen some people kind of really stuck? Is it an individual thing?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I've been at it long enough to make any claims on other people. I would say, for me, and kind of maybe go back to your couple of your initial questions, adaptability, as I think about it, is probably one that I've developed quite a bit of, that I wasn't as high on maybe going into the military. And as I recall, I typically didn't really like when things kind of changed without my control, but I got very, very used to it in the military.
Yeah,
and so now so now I'm pretty good at it. And so that might be, that's a good example, at least in my case, of an attribute that I've somewhat hyper developed based on the career I chose. So yes, you can develop it. However, we have to understand that it gets complex because attributes also are contextual, and the way they show up is contextual. This is why I wanted to write about how attributes kind of weave and play in different environments and how they can, bounce off of each other. But I realized it would have been a 1,000-page book and I'd still be writing it, right? So I had to keep it very general. So the example is this. I could and did develop patience with my own children, okay? It doesn't mean I have patience for other people's kids, right? I mean, so adaptability, any one of these attributes you can actually, and this is why attribute development needs to, if you want to do it truly, you need to hop in between different contexts. Fear and courage is another example, right? You can develop, I hate heights. I've always hated heights. And so what I'd do is I'd climb this, I talk about in the book, I'd climb this 60-foot cargo net that we had at the obstacle course on the SEAL base. Every time I'd run by it and climb to the top of it and sit at the top of it. And I did that over and over again. Well, after a week or two, I'd get to the top of that and I wouldn't feel fear anymore. All right. It's because I've conditioned myself. I've become certain about that. So, and by the way, it doesn't necessarily mean that translated into other contexts as much. Right. So, it was great for that cargo net, but, put me somewhere else on the heights, I'd probably feel nervous. Right. So you have to think about those contexts. It gets kind of complex. But you need to be specific about, okay, what do I actually need? This is why no one should go out and try to be optimal on all of these attributes. People should understand, okay, what in fact do I need to be optimal on inside of what context, and then work on that.
Yeah. One thing I do want to say is what that specific example gave you was the knowledge that you could grow and change your approach to things and modify how you felt. So that in itself is a important thing to learn, even if the specific scenario doesn't move out to other things that you'd be scared of heights on, for example.
Yeah, totally. If
there was one attribute that you could kind of bump up in your life, what would it be?
Oh boy. I mean, I would say, so it's an attribute that I talk about in the book, but I kind of talk about only in one facet. I talk about discipline and the difference between self-discipline and actual kind of, discipline and self-discipline. And the difference for the audience is that discipline holistically deals with our ability to move towards those endeavors those goals and endeavors that we set, that the outside world has a say in whether or not we complete. Okay. So before I go on to that, I'll just say what self-discipline is. Self-discipline is the ability to move towards those goals and endeavors that the outside world has no say in whether or not we complete. Okay, so for example, say if someone wants to get in shape or eat better. Okay, someone can decide to do that. All right, and then a week later, be in Las Vegas at the buffet. Okay, the buffet is not going to throw pastries at that person. It's all up to that person as to whether or not they achieve that goal. That is self-discipline. Okay, control of oneself. The outside world has no say in whether or not you complete that task or goal. On the other hand, you have discipline, and we have a goal like becoming a Navy SEAL or becoming a podcaster or writing a book and becoming a successful author. The outside world has a say in whether or not you're going to accomplish that goal. And so overall discipline takes a level of adaptability and fluidity, and in fact, non-structure to accomplish those. Self-discipline takes structure and routine to accomplish. I know that's a long explanation to explain the attribute I want to develop, but I am someone who's really high on discipline but low on self-discipline. So in other words, I'm really good at setting audacious long-term big goals that the outside world has a say in and achieving them. I mean, being a Navy SEAL, writing a book, all that stuff, I'm pretty good at that. When it comes to disciplining myself, I'm horrible, and I don't know why that is. I always joke that I don't like to be told what to do, even when I'm the one telling myself what to do. I don't like to be told by myself what to do either. I don't know what that is, but so I'm someone who has to work on my own self-discipline. And there are people in the reverse, right? There are people who are actually highly self-disciplined. So in other words, they are in absolute 100% control of themselves, their bodies, their food, whatever it is. When it comes to long-term audacious goals, they haven't gotten anywhere because they can't do it, right? The best is a balance, obviously, between the two, to have both discipline and self-discipline. If there's one, again, a really long way to answer this question, if there's one that I endeavor to work on more, it'd probably be my self-discipline. So there we go.
Yeah, the balance is interesting. You can either try and find the balance in your point, or you can team up with people who are going to equal each other out. It's like a good relationship. Thinking about my fiance and I, how we balance each other out. I'm definitely way more on the setting audacious goal side, and she's way better at actually keeping her shit together on a daily basis. Whereas I'm like, oh, that's interesting. So there's that kind of that tessellation that happens. Talking about environment, what is the optimal environment, do you think, to develop attributes?
Well, I mean, it's an environment of discomfort, and again, the environment's subjective to each person. So, but it's going to involve discomfort and some stress and some challenge, whatever that feels like to you. I mean, again, two people, say you have me and someone else who are trying to develop their courage. Okay, that person has no issues with heights whatsoever, but hates to be underwater. I have issues with heights, but I love to be underwater, right? So I would develop my courage somewhere having to do with heights, and that person would have to develop their courage somewhere having to be underwater, right? I mean, I always joke, I have been underwater, pitch black, sea life teeming around me, can't even see my hand in front of my face. I could fall asleep. I'm that comfortable, right? Mm-hmm. Whereas other people, that would scare the living heck out of them, right? They would not, they shudder to even think about being underwater that way. So it's really very contextual to the person. What one has to ask themselves is, okay, what are those environments inside of which I want to develop this attribute and need to develop this attribute? Again, it's not only want, it's also a need. The current trajectory and course of your life may not require developing that attribute. So you may not have to. But yeah, find environments of discomfort and challenge. That's where you can develop them the most viscerally.
Yeah. One thing that I really want to make sure we get in is it's about a conversation that you had with Dr. Andrew Huberman, who I know you're kind of good pals with, and thinking about how this applies to athletes, because they're often told to chase these peak performances, these peak experiences, these flow states. And it's definitely something that I've spoken a lot about before as well. But the difference between peak states and optimal performance, they are drastic. And it offered me a really nice shift in kind of letting myself off the perfection hook occasionally, and focusing on good enough to get the results. So could you speak for a bit on peak versus optimal performance, please?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Andrew and I, when we first met, this is what we kind of bonded over right away, because both of us were somewhat frustrated with this this obsession over peak performance. Everybody wanted to peak this, peak that, peak, and peak is just that. It's an apex from which you can only go down. That's all it is. Peak often has to be scheduled and planned for and prepped for. Right. The football player plans his entire week to prep to peak for 3 hours on game day. Okay. There's nothing wrong with peak. What we always considered, and we kind of looked at, say, SEALs and really life, but certainly SEALs was our first kind of environment to look at, is that we were in fact optimal performers. And optimal performance is, how can I do the very best in the moment, whatever the best looks like in that moment. Okay. Sometimes the best might look like peak. All right. And it's cool and everything's groovy and there's flow states and everything like that. Sometimes our best is, hey, I am just head down, going step by step, nugging it out. And it's painful, it's ugly, it's gritty, it's dirty, but that's all I got right now. That is also optimal performance. And so what optimal performance allows us to do is two things. First of all, it allows us to celebrate those times that we're just nugging it out. And it's painful and it's dirty and it's ugly, it's not pretty, and it's just step by step, but that's okay because we're doing it, right? We're performing, okay? And we can pat ourselves on the back for that. So it allows us to reward ourselves there, but it also allows us to understand energy modulation better. Like, how can I modulate my energy? Because I don't need to be peak all the time. I don't need to be peak when I'm driving to the grocery store. And so optimal allows me to kind of modulate energy in a way and in a fashion that I'm giving and producing exactly what I need in the moment, no more nor less. And so if that means I need to be peaking, I can peak on demand. If that means I need to be recovering, I can be recovering so that I may be able to peak on demand. That sets us up for a long game, a game where we don't know what's going to happen, which is obviously life. But one of the examples I'll give is so often on the way into a mission, and I was talking, even on the big ones, like I talked to a couple of my buddies who were on the Bin Laden raid. Okay, on the helicopter ride in, guys are sleeping. All right, you think the movies and TV would purport that you're like a football team, like hoorah, yeah, you're all fired up and charged. That's a waste of energy, and so we always would, on the way into missions, you just grab some time. Can I relax? Can I settle? Can I keep my energy in reserve? Because I don't need to be expending. Because I don't know what's coming. I don't know how long I'm going to be out there. I don't know what's going to be coming at me. I need to make sure that I'm managing. So optimal allows us to look at energy in a highly different way. It allows us that modulation, which I think is critical for the long game.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just so much more, I think, healthy for developing that relationship with yourself as well. It's like, I gave good enough as opposed to I got the perfect outcome. Right. Is there anything that you've changed your mind on or adapted since you wrote the book?
That's a great one. I was very careful to try to write the book in a way that could be interrogated and modified and debated if need be. Right? I tried, and you don't want to come across as like a limp noodle that is definitive about nothing. But I so far, I think I have not looked back at anything that I wanted to change in mass. I think, if anything, I've been able to elaborate more on things as I've talked about the book for the last year. And that's fine. Again, there's always revisions you can do. I guess you can elaborate on stuff. But again, I think I would say nothing that I wanted to change, nothing that I would change. I think the elaboration process has been fun to get even more deep on things. Yeah.
Yeah, I bet you've got that kind of foundational structural knowledge where things start to connect between each other and you start to see links that you wouldn't have seen without talking about it and having different inputs.
That's right.
A change of tack to kind of wrap things up. What books have you gifted most?
Recently mine, but I know what you're saying. Yeah. I think one of the ones I always recommend, I love Harari. I love Yuval Harari's work. He wrote the book Sapiens and Homo Deus. And I think I love the way he approaches humanity and our species, and kind of explaining that. I love that. I think I also like Nassim Taleb. Wrote Anti-Fragile, wrote The Black Swan, and a couple. He has another one. I can't remember his most recent, but yeah, I like books that help people see things differently, from a different angle, from a different optic. I like books that help us articulate things that haven't been necessarily articulated properly, which is probably why I tried to write the attributes that way. So yeah, those are some of the books that I recommend usually. So
nice. And then, what habits do you perform for your own mental health or performance on a frequent basis?
Yeah, that's my self-discipline, which I don't. No, there's not many, so that's why I need self-discipline. I would say, I mean, from mental health, it's all family. Like I hug my kids multiple times every day. I hug my wife multiple times I'm home now, whereas I wasn't for 20 plus years. I was gone for so long. So I enjoy working from home. I enjoy being here. I enjoy being a really integral part of my kids' lives and my whole family's life. I have a lot of family who lives around in the area. So that is probably the one thing I do consistently, and that I actually need. Even when I travel, I feel it when I don't get it. So, but yeah, that family bonding is an absolute for me. So,
yeah, it sounds like gratitude's a huge part of that as well. Then,
oh yeah, absolutely. Gratitude. I mean, gratitude, yeah, and I would recommend to anybody, because again, the fastest way out of depression is to think about what you're grateful for, and really feel it, because you actually generate a whole host of awesome neurobiology, neurotransmitters and hormones through that active feeling of gratitude. So a great question people can ask themselves if they are feeling a little bit off or down is, okay, what am I grateful for? And really take some time and think about it, because you will guarantee feel better, about yourself and about your day.
Beautiful. And then finally, where can people find you?
Yes, the best place, the one-stop shop would probably be the website. So theattributes.com. There you can get the book, or at least get links to the book to buy it. You can take the assessment tool, which is free, to figure out where you stand on some of these attributes. There's my links to social media, LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And then there's some blog posts and things like that, some media that people can check out. So theattributes.com is the best place.
Yeah, the assessment tool was really good. I did it this morning, and
cool.
I was like, yeah, that nailed it. It really nailed it. So it's cool to see.
So, quick question: you did this morning. Was it the shorter version? Did it take a little? Was it like 50 questions, or was it like 25 questions? Because I think we're just in the process of changing that.
Yeah, I'd say it's probably about 25. It took about 5 minutes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah. So we just changed it out. It was 50 questions per ad, so it took a while. But we've been able to now collect a bunch of data, and so now it's shorter. So if someone goes on there, it takes only about 5 minutes per section. So that's cool that you're able to take that.
Well, thank you so much, Rich. I really do appreciate your time.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. It's great to be here.
I'm Tom Foxley. Thank you for listening to the Limitless Athlete Podcast. Following this episode, we'll also be releasing The Debrief, which is a summary of the wisdom within this conversation and practical steps to applying it in order to enhance your own mindset. Make sure you subscribe to the show wherever you get your podcast so you can start growing the mindset of a limitless athlete. Wherever you listen to your podcast, if you can leave a 5-star review, that would be awesome too, or a 1-star review if you think this is just shit. For further mindset training resources and tools, head to mindsetrx.com or find us on Instagram by searching for Mindset Rx'd. Next week, I will be talking to a breathwork physio who specializes in pain science. It's going to be a great one.